Hi, I'm Dale Hoggins. I'm an 1950 graduate of Edmonds High School. And who are you?
My name is Donna Lee Allen Hoggins, and I also graduated from Edmonds High School, 1950.
We both right now live in the city of Edmonds. Are you a Washington native?
Yes, I am.
So am I. I was born in Yakima, on the Yakima Indian Reservation. Where were you born?
I was born in Wenatchee, Washington.
Are your parents Washington natives?
Yes, they are, and also my grandparents and great-grandparents.
Wow. Does that mean you have a Washington State Pioneer Certificate?
Yep.
Issued by the State Geological Society?
Yes, I do.
Does that mean that you had family in this state before the state was statehood?
Yes.
Became a state?
Mm-hmm.
Before 1889?
Right.
Wow. Where did they live?
Mostly in eastern Washington. Farmers, wheat farmers.
Did they homestead there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Not that I was around to know about it.
Well, my parents were not Washington natives. My dad was born in Kansas, and my mother was born in Oregon. But I was born at the Yakima Indian Reservation in Yakima County. I'm not Native American. My family leased land from the tribe, and they were primarily potato farmers. They did raise hay and grain and corn for farm animals, but that was back-breaking kind of work. Did I ask you if your parents were wheat farmers?
I don't know.
Okay. I don't mean your parents, I mean
My grandparents.
your ancestors.
Yes.
That came.
Pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where's Pine City?
Well, Pine City, you almost find it by mistake.
Now,
Eastern Washington.
Okay. Do you remember what brought your great-great-grandparents to Washington?
I think probably the land.
And what was it about the land that brought them here?
Well, you probably know that better than I.
It was free.
Yeah.
So they got the land out of the Homestead Act, didn't they?
Uh-huh.
And they were dryland wheat farmers. What was that area also called besides?
The Palouse.
The Palouse, okay. Now, where were you born? Did I
Wenatchee,
ask you that already? Okay.
at Wenatchee, Washington, and grew up in Monitor, which is 8 miles from Wenatchee, 4 miles from Cashmere. My father was the principal of the school, and he also did some teaching. And he played lots of sports, baseball, basketball. He played baseball in Canada sometimes. They passed the hat and got traveling money. Passed the hat even at the local games, and that kind of augmented the income. And they also had boarders, and the boarders were unmarried female teachers. They had to live with responsible people, and I guess the principal seems pretty responsible. So we had a full house. That was the third house that I remember living in. Before that, they were just renting. So this house they bought. And so I went to the Monitor School, grades 1, 2, and 3. And I remember being at lots of baseball games, lots of basketball games, because that was what filled the weekends mostly. And my folks sometimes worked in the fruits. My mother did some apple sorting, and they did some cherry picking. So,
Can you imagine what it'd be like to be a teacher and have to work with your principal
With
all
your
day
boss.
long, your boss, and then have to live with him at night, and then share, not even having a private bathroom?
yeah, we had one bathroom in that house, and they had to. The stairs were in the corner of their bedroom, so they had to go through their bedroom. There was one person who was upstairs, and then one at each end, a sunroom and a den. And that sounds a little pretentious, but I think the rooms weren't very big. They probably weren't even 8 by 10. As a kid, I thought they were big, but now I'm sure they weren't.
My parents farmed with my dad's family, my dad's mother and father, and they farmed there until I was about 3 years old. And I had 5 brothers no sisters. 3 of my brothers died in infancy. So I can't imagine the pain that must have been in my family at the loss of their children. 3 of them died in infancy, I said, and 1 of them died as about 40 years old. When I was about 3...
40 years old?
What?
You said 1 died.
40 years old.
Who was 40 years old?
Bud.
Oh, you're talking about Bud, okay.
Okay. Then we moved to the city of Wapato, not much of a city, but a town of Wapato. And my father and my grandfather went into the trucking business. And they hauled fresh produce and fruit to western Washington and also to Oregon and California. And we stayed there until about about the time I entered school. And at that time, then we moved to the Rainier Valley in Seattle.
Well, we stayed in Monitor through the 3rd grade, and my father had an interview with a school district over here. It was Oak Harbor, and he just about accepted that job, but the superintendent of the Edmonds School District came over to Monitor to interview him and offered him the job, and so he was able to, that was a better job, he was able to, I don't know if he'd actually accepted the job in Oak Harbor, but he got a release anyhow. And so we moved when I was in the 4th grade, and then I went to Alderwood grade school, grades 4 through 8. And so I was in the 4th grade when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, so that was a pretty momentous thing. And all the kids in the class were more than excited, sort of nervous about thinking someone's going to attack. And of course, because we were right on the coast, when we were in eastern Washington, it was always called the coast. It wasn't western Washington. So we did lots of things during the duration of the war to help. For some reason, we saved lots of string, balls of string. We saved balls of tinfoil. We had blackout curtains over the windows so that no light would show. There were actually wardens who would check if there were lights showing. And right. And then when we got to the 7th grade, our teacher was a longtime knitter, and so she had us and taught us how to knit Afghan squares, which were then given to the Red Cross, and they stitched them all together to use in the veterans hospitals. So one of the interesting things about that was that we had sort of a contest to see who could knit the most. It was just straight knitting, not knit and purl like you would normally do. And so one boy brought in a lot of squares that ostensibly he had done, but we later found out that his mother had done them when she was home. We didn't think that was exactly fair. Another thing I especially remember at Alderwood was the 4th grade teacher had us clip out pictures of cars from magazines, and each one of us had a car with our name on it. So we did our multiplication tables when we thought we were ready, standing beside our desk. So each time we got the first one, the ones and then the twos, we could move the car over. So it was a race across the blackboard. And then when we got all the way through the 12s, there was an airplane up there. So you had to say that you were ready to try for the airplane, and then stand beside your Panama desk and go all the way through, 1s through 12s, without a mistake. Are you familiar with Panama desks? Did you have those, Dale?
Yes, I do. These were desks that are either screwed down on runners or screwed down to the floor, so you couldn't move the desks back and forth. Everything was orderly, in a row, right straight rows from front to back.
And there was an inkwell, and there was a crack in the seat. The seats would lift up, you know, and sometimes the boys were checking to see if the pencil would go through the girl's seat, that little hole. We had a pretty full classroom. We were about 42 or 43 of us. in the class. Another episode in the 4th grade was that I was home with the MUPs, and everybody in class wrote me a letter, and the excitement that had happened when I was home being sick was that some of the boys got the idea to climb the ladder in the coat room up to the attic, and then they went through the attic. So I missed that occasion, but I heard all about it.
I lived in the Rainier Valley, I said, prior to World War II. At that time, my grandparents lived with us. My grandmother was ill, and my grandfather was taking care of him. So there's my mother, my father, my brother, and I. And in addition to that, we had 3 boarders. And the boarders were all had registered for the draft for World War II, although the war hadn't started. But there was
the draft, though.
There was this build-up beforehand. They were waiting to be inducted. And so they lived with us. One of them was my uncle, and one of them was a guy who later on, after the World War II was over, established the business called Chubby and Tubby, which is
Was that on Highway 99?
They had several locations, but it was a landmark place where people would go to get the value village of hardware stores. About time I was in, at the end of the 2nd grade, we moved to Yakima. And we lived in Yakima when World War I was, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7th. That was,
World War II.
Or World War II. That was, for me, that was a very, one of the most significant days in my life. It's hardly a day goes by now that I don't think about how I felt on that Sunday when a newspaper boy came running down the street yelling, "Extra, extra, Japanese bomb Pearl Harbor." And even though we lived inland, we thought it had meaning for us right away. We participated, there was kind of a war effort in those days that involved citizens, the home front we were called. And so we had to do, we participated in things like scrap dives. We'd go up and down in the neighborhood in the vacant lots and find old metal, paper drives, scrap metal paper drives. Can't think of what's else.
Well, we had the tin foil and the string,
Oh,
and then there was rationing
Oh,
for
yeah.
gas and shoes and certain foods.
food and clothing, and almost all consumer items were rationed. That means you couldn't get as much as you wanted. And you were issued coupon books that let you buy so much vegetables, so much meat each week. If you wanted something that wasn't on the list, you had to get a priority. And that was a special permit. And the permit said that you were contributing somehow to the home front effort. And in my case, I got a priority to buy a bicycle because I was a paper boy. And
That was considered an important job.
yeah. And so, but however, there were no new bicycles available. The only bicycles that were available were the used bicycles, even in the bicycle stores. So,
Well, the manufacturing was all done for the war, for whatever the Army needed or the various branches of the service.
the ladies like to have nylons. Can you tell them what the ladies did instead of having
Yeah,
nylons?
my folks had a charge account, what was called the Bon Marché, now is Macy's. And every once in a while they'd get a shipment of nylon stockings. That was before pantyhose. But they had to take whatever size came in. And so I remember my mother putting hers on and turning the toe of the nylon stockings back about 4 inches because they were way too long for her feet. So that was one of the ways the wars affected us at home.
What else did the ladies do to their legs besides the,
Oh, you mean painted their legs? Yeah.
they painted their legs so they looked like they had stockings,
Yeah.
nylon stockings.
Sometimes in those days there was a seam in the back, and so they'd even draw a seam on their legs to look like they were wearing them.
A victory garden. Tell them what a victory
Oh,
garden is.
right.
What's a victory garden?
Well, it was just a a garden that you used at your own home, easily grown things like carrots and cabbage. Carrots could stay in the ground even when it froze, and you could pull them up when they were ready, and everybody pretty much tilled their own land.
The idea was that if you grew food, as much food as you could at home, then that'd make more food available for the military and overseas.
Took some of the pressure
and
off.
all that kind of stuff. I remember I lived at the time. I mentioned we lived in Yakima when the war started. Okay, I can remember going by a field one time and seeing all these guys out in the field hoeing, and I wondered how come there are so many people working, because young kids, grade school, high school, junior high and high school kids were recruited as farm laborers. Turned out that these guys were German POWs. So they were captors, prisoners of war, brought to the United States. There was a big POW camp in Idaho.
Did they all have uniforms?
They were all dressed alike, yeah. I wouldn't call them uniforms exactly. And they were hired out to farmers, local farmers. Some of these POWs lived in their homes, and they were paid a small wage, but
Like what, 10
10 cents an hour, 25 cents an hour, kind of stuff. But then they had to pay for their board and room too.
They didn't have much left, I can imagine.
When you moved to Alderwood, where did you live?
Well, first we lived on what is now 196th. In those days it was called the Alderwood Edmonds Road. I always saw Alderwood first because Alderwood is where I live. It's about where the Kentucky Fried Chicken is now on 196th. And we lived there a year, at least I remember a year, but apparently my parents were evicted because the owners of the place that they were renting wanted to raise the rent when the war started. There was a lot of competition for places to live, and but they couldn't raise the rent as long as that was price control then. So they had to get my folks out and have a family member living there for a period of time, and then they could raise the rent for the next person who came along to rent it. So from there we moved to a little house on Beach Road that's now part of Alderwood Mall Parkway, or
Near the bus garage.
yeah, the Edmonds School District Park or bus garage. And we had just enough property to have a cow there, and so that was another year. And then my folks bought this place up near Martha Lake when I was in the 6th grade. And let's see, 4, 5, 6, yeah. And it's on, it was just the Martha Lake Road, but now it's 164th. And it was Ash Way.
Maybe I ought to describe where Alderwood Manor was. Generally, Alderwood Manor is everything in Edmonds School District east of Highway 99 and west of the Bothell Highway, and beginning at the King County line and going north to 148th Street. There was no 148th Street then. And Alderwood Manor at one time was called the egg-laying capital of the world. It was a land promotion scheme. What do I call a scheme? Promotion idea run by Pope and Talbot. Pope and Talbot had all the land. They came and logged off all the virgin timber. Then the timber that grew back was all secondary growth. So they divided up all this land into 5-acre plots, sold it as ranches, little ranches.
Or ranchettes.
Ranchettes, they called them. They set up something called a demonstration farm. They taught people how to raise chickens, 10 fruit trees, nut trees, and then they sold them 5 acres, provided them with the chickens, and at one time, Alderwood Manor boasted the chicken that laid the most eggs in 1 year, called Baby Ruth.
They shipped all over the United States, didn't they?
I'm not sure about that. But Alderwood Manor was real estate promotion name. There was, and Alderwood was called Alderwood because that's mostly what the second growth was the Alderwood tree. And because of a real rural area compared to the west side of the Highway 99, which is more urban, we had a nickname. And almost everybody had animals, farm livestock, chickens and pigs and horses and cows and goats and name them all. People had all these kinds of things. And not only did people make a living off these homes, these 5 acres, but most cases they were supplementing the income. It's like having a part-time job. But because there were so many farm animals, the kids from Alderwood Manor, Alderwood Manor got the nickname of Alderwood Manure.
That was mostly the Edmonds kids.
So,
Hoggins.
Alderwood, there were several distinct areas. One was Alderwood Manor, the city of Edmonds to begin with, town of Woodway, or at least what became the town of Woodway, the unincorporated areas of Esperance and Meadowdale. And in those days, there was the name Montlake Terrace did not come into existence. Or Briar had not even been thought of.
Or Mill Creek even at that time wasn't even in existence.
Beginning in 1946, beginning post-World War II, and there was lots of growth in this area. The guys, several million guys, had returned home from the war. They were anxious to get started with families, go to school, and so there was a big boom in housing. And people took whatever housing they could get because it was hard to get. My folks bought 5 acres near her folks, up near Martha Lake. It was a mile down a dirt road. There was no water, there was no electricity, there was no telephone, there was no sewer. It was just a 500 square foot house that wasn't finished on the inside.
Cold, wasn't it?
Cold. However, it was cheap. It was like $1,500. You could pay $100 down and $10 a month. So you finished off the place by buying one piece of passport a week. Kind of stuff. But anyway, there were lots and lots of homes east of Highway 99 that were like that. Let me see what else I was. Oh, and
Well, then Montlake Terrace built up with concrete block houses.
and there was kind of a rivalry, regional rivalry. It seemed like the kids in the city of Edmonds thought they owned the place, and all the rest of us were outsiders.
Well, when we went down to Edmonds, we knew all the Alderwood kids. Dale didn't come in grade school, but I knew all the ones from Alderwood. And we sort of felt out of place, like second-class citizens or something, because they'd been to school in that same building for junior high, to go to Edmonds High, and we hadn't even been inside the place. So we were trying to figure out how did the lockers and getting assignments, and it was pretty confusing. And Dale came as a freshman, and he was even more remote or more left out of things because he didn't have any buddies from Alderwood or anyplace else.
I moved in the summer of 1946 before school started, like about August. So I knew one person in my neighborhood. I didn't know a single soul in the school. And in those days, we rode a bus. I had to walk a mile out to catch the bus. And then we caught a bus that brought us down to Edmonds. And then the bus took us back at night, like a 5-mile bus ride, twice a day.
So that kept us kind of remote, too, from the town of Edmonds.
What was the exciting thing on Sunday? What was the big event on Sunday in your family?
Well, my family always went down to the Princess Theater in Edmonds to go to the movies. And it was always unusual to see another car because there's so little traffic on what is now 196. So when we would see a car, you know, we were always looking to see what's the make, what kind of a car is that? Because it was exciting.
What did the high school kids do on Friday nights?
Well, there was the canteen.
What was a canteen?
The canteen was in the Masonic Temple.
And
A chaperone or two,
what went on there?
mostly dancing.
Mostly
Yeah,
dancing,
right.
okay.
At least we called it that.
Do you remember what the last tune was every year? Before the time to go home?
The only thing I could think of was Good Night Irene or Good Night Sweetheart. I don't think that was it. What was it?
There wasn't,
Not
there was a
Not our
suspicion,
school song.
there wasn't a lot for kids to do. And, so it's Friday night basketball games, Friday night football games, and then generally there was nothing to do afterwards. So some, like kids do, they find mischief. And so this was the community's answer to juvenile delinquency.
But we
Was
had
to give
very-
them someplace, something to do on Friday
We had
nights.
very few cars though, too. Not many kids had cars.
When you got your first television set, how big was the screen? Do you remember the diagonal measurement?
Yeah,
of that first?
it was the kind like this, it was curved. And it was Kukla, Fran, and Ollie, puppets.
The diagonal measurement of the screen was 9 inches.
And,
How
and,
many TV stations did you have? With selections?
It was one to start, but I think maybe there were about 3.
By the time we graduated from high school? Was the TV on after midnight?
Probably not.
How did
I remember the King logo on there when they signed off.
When they signed off, what happened, what music was played every night at 12 o'clock?
I don't know if I was up at 12.
No. If you were up at 12 o'clock, they played the Star Spangled Banner.
Oh.
That was good night. Mostly no daytime stuff on TV. It was afternoon and evenings. A guy named Milton Berle was the big comedian in those days. And the difference between what's on TV now and then was that TV in those days, everybody smoked.
Oh, yeah.
Now you hardly ever see a cigarette at all,
And of course
except
it was-
for comics who are using cigars and
Of course, it was black
stuff.
and white for a long time.
Okay.
It's kind of interesting to think that if my dad had gone to Oak Harbor, you and I wouldn't have even met. We think about that once in a while.
My,
How close that was.
when my family left Yakima, we were on our way to Denver. And we stopped to say goodbye to my grandmother. And
Where did
so
your grandmother live?
she lived in that time in South Seattle. Well, no, she lived, yeah, in South Seattle. Stopped to say goodbye to her. Then we came out to see my uncle who lived out here. And then, my dad got a job, so that we decided to stay. So we think that if those two kinds of things hadn't happened, we would never have met. And we've been married how long?
60 plus. What is it now? 61?
61
We'll be
years.
62.
So,
Yeah.
and we remember when we dated, what the first date was?
It was a sweetheart dance put on by the Demolay.
So, how many dances did you dance with other guys that night?
1 or 2.
2. And only the guy we double dated with.
Yeah.
So, when we got married, what date did we choose?
Well, we picked the same date that we had started going steady 2 years before.
What does it mean to go steady?
Well, that means you didn't go out with anybody else.
Didn't sit under the apple tree with anybody
No.
else but me?
No.
Okay.
You
So,
didn't even look at anybody of the opposite sex.
do you remember when we first got really that we noticed each other?
You mean the junior play?
Yeah, seriously?
Yeah. We had a big snow that year, and in Alderwood, we always got a lot more snow.
Why don't we tell them, first of all,
Edmonds.
the juniors class put on a play.
Well, you
And
can't
we were both participants in the play.
You can't take
Okay.
it with you. So, we got all this snow, so school was closed. The buses couldn't get around for one thing, right? And in Alderwood, we always got much more snow than in Edmonds. But anyway, there still was play practice. And so we were expected to get to practice, so a number of us rode in your car or your folks' car. Dale and I were on the same bus though all the time too.
Should explain that when this snow came, and when we were junior, it was the record snowfall for the state of Washington in something like 50 years. And it was so cold for so long that, and before much insulation, many, many, many homes were frozen up and they were without water and other kinds of things that water provided for weeks until they get the stuff unthawed. And then when the freeze went away, all that frozen stuff, there was all this water all over the place.
And
The
didn't
big jobs of fixing
didn't
it
the
up.
roads give way too, for the buses couldn't go over?
Well, that was part of it
They
too.
froze underneath the surface and,
Most of the roads around here were not paved. There was like Highway 99, 196, a few of the roads in downtown Edmonds paved, but all the rural areas were unpaved. So the roads would freeze, and then it would thaw, they would turn into mud. And so they just turned to be ruts, it became impassable. Or the county would forbid buses from running because they would break up the roads. So it was a combination of the snow, the freeze, the county prohibition on having buses on the roads.
so that went on about 2 weeks, didn't it?
Anyway, I had a part to play, and she was an understudy,
Understudy.
but she also put on my makeup
I was
every,
in the makeup club.
so we got to stare at one another. As we were as she was putting on my makeup.
And he had a lot of makeup too, because he was playing Donald, who was black.
Now, probably couldn't, nowadays, we've seen other plays that were presented with You Can't Take It With You. Most of them exclude the character Donald now because he was black and not,
And he was kind of a comedian too.
and because in my case, I had black makeup on. And so they give them some other nationality now, and ethnic background now, so.
There were no
We
blacks.
we did something we didn't know better to do. So,
Well, there weren't any blacks in our school anyhow,
no.
at that time.
Tell us about,
You're at about 33 minutes, by the way.
how much?
About 33, so you got another 7 minutes or so.
Okay.
What have we left
Oh.
out?
Donna and I have a nickname that we like. She's called Mama Dogs, and I'm called Daddy Dogs. And I've had lots of nicknames through the years. That's the one we like the best. And it came because our son was a baseball player and a basketball player, and had lots of speed. And the kids named him Dogs because of his speed. And then,
Well, not just that, they used to say Hoggy Dog too, because of the name Hoggins, or Doggy Hogs, or something like that.
so Dogs was kind of the favorite name for him. And then they began to, because we came to all the games and cheered heartily, they called us Daddy Dogs and Mama Dog.
Well, did we used to bring drinks or something too?
Yeah.
They did sort of notice us for that too.
That, by the way, is, we lost our son he was a homicide victim. And that, by the way, is one of the hardest days of our life. Something we feel and think about every single day. The loss of a child is hard to fathom.
But we still
It's hard
talk
to
about him.
exclaim.
He was kind of a character.
Well, we have great memories of him growing up, great memories of family times, and so it brings cheer to our hearts, comfort to our hearts to be able to talk about him to one another. And the other thing that happens in families, when they lose children, oftentimes the families end up in divorce because they can't talk to one another about the loss, and they can't share one another's feelings, and so the family ends up breaking up. And so we feel real fortunate. We went to a grief counseling session, and it was kind of a group where we sat around and shared feelings and thoughts. And the thing that struck me about that group we were a part of was that I knew somebody, and I knew one of the adults, usually they were husband and wife. I knew all the adults, or most of the adults, or knew of their children. So some way I had personal contact. And it just struck me how sometimes we think these things are, the loss of a child is isolated, but there are lots of people out there with lots of pain. And you see these incidents where children lose their lives for whatever circumstances every single day. And so it's just a lot of pain out there. But we're glad we've got each other. We've had each other.
Yeah, we're stuck with each other.
Oh, tell us about sports in high school. What did you do in sports in high school?
Oh, you mean when I turned out for
Yeah.
sports? Well, I was pretty fast too. Actually, my folks and this was back when my brother and I were kids, went to Old Settlers Picnic at Halls Lake, and they had a foot race for every level. The women, the men, the boys, the girls, and each of us won in each of our races, so the whole family was pretty fast. So in high school, when I turned out for sports, there was one girl who was always the winner in all the 100-yard dashes, and I beat her.
One time.
So that was my crowning glory.
What was different about girls' sports then and today?
Well, we couldn't play against other schools. We just had to play, what is that called when it's?
Like intramural.
Intramural, yeah. And then we only played half the floor in basketball. So that was something that was a lot different. We played basketball in the field house, which is now the Boys and Girls Club. And there really weren't sidelines. The wall was the line. I can remember sort of getting bumped up against that once in a while. But supposedly girls weren't strong enough to have competitive sports.
Did you have a telephone when you were growing up in your house?
Yes, it was a party line.
What's a party line?
Well, that's when you don't have a private line by yourself and other people can listen in on conversations. And there was a boy in my same class who was on our line, so he pretty much knew anything I was talking about on the phone to some other boy.
Do you know how many people were on our party line? 10.
No.
When we got a phone, there were 10.
Well, we had the 4, and if you call down to Edmonds, it was an operator call, and it was out of our area, so it cost 5 cents to call down to Edmonds. So we didn't call Edmonds very often either. Doesn't that seem strange?
Did you have a special ring?
Yes.
So everybody had a distinctive ring.
Well,
So many longs and so many
yeah.
shorts.
Or so certain number of rings. Yep. So you could identify who was getting a call if it wasn't yours.
Anything else you want to say about telephones or differences between now and then?
Oh, I thought about
What?
I thought about the address
When you were in grade
thing.
school, tell us about the girls' dress in grade school.
Oh, we could not wear pants to school in grade school, and if it was really, really cold, we could wear pants underneath a dress or skirt. But as soon as we got to school, we had to take it off because we couldn't be in school in pants. And then there was also the lipstick thing. There wasn't really a rule about lipstick, but there were some girls whose parents didn't think it was a good idea, that they were old enough, and so they wait till they get to school. Somehow they came into possession of lipstick and would put some on and then made sure they wiped it off before they went home. So
In those days, the dress for boys was a pair of cords. And for some
well,
reason,
nobody wore jeans.
yeah, jeans weren't in style. The dress was cords, and the cuffs were turned up so that your socks showed. And so Argyle socks were big. The cords, I didn't like this, but the cords were hardly ever washed, or they were washed so many times at the beginning that all the color was out of them.
There weren't any ribs left, were there?
Yeah.
They were washed that much.
The standard attire for girls, particularly when they had their pictures taken, was a sweater and a pearl necklace. That was the dress.
So if you look in the annual, the yearbook of our graduating class, practically every girl has the same thing on, just different
You guys got
kinds
about
of
1 minute.
sweaters. And then we had regulation clothes we wore on Wednesdays for girls' club, middies and ties.
Who was your favorite teacher of all?
My favorite teacher of all in school? Well, I liked my 7th grade teacher especially. She was just
Her name?
Johanna Owen,
Okay,
Mrs. Owen.
my favorite teacher was a man named Reardon Virgin, and he was my chemistry teacher.
If Dale and I hadn't been in the same class, I wouldn't have gotten an A in chemistry. But he would try anything, so he sort of dragged me along with him.